Why do apple blossoms always have 5 petals? And how does symmetry, which occurs in the crystal, also manifest itself in the formation of the flower and the shell? It seems that the nature have spoken in the language of geometry since forever, and humans at all levels of civilizations had their way to understand that language. Our human bodies on this planet all developed with a common geometric progression from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 primal cells and beyond. Almost everywhere we look, the mineral intelligence embodied within crystalline structures follows a geometry so consistently accurate. Geometry means measure of the earth. In ancient Egypt, from which Greece inherited this study, the Nile would flood its banks each year, covering the land and obliterating the orderly marking of plot and farm areas. This yearly flood symbolized to the Egyptian the cyclic return of the primal watery chaos. And when the waters receded, the work began of redefining and re-establishing the boundaries. This work was called geometry and was seen as a re-establishment of the principle of order and law on Earth. Each year, the areas measured out would be somewhat different. The human order would shift, and this was reflected in the ordering of the Earth. The temple astronomer might say that the certain celestial configurations had changed so that the orientation or location of a temple had to be adjusted accordingly. So the laying of squares upon the earth had, for the Egyptian, a metaphysical as well as a physical and social dimension. This activity of measuring the earth became the basis for a science of natural law, as it is embodied in the archetypal forms of circle, square, and triangle. Socrates speaks many times of the role of geometry in turning the soul inward to its original remembered state. Sacred geometry is the path towards the infinite cosmos, which is the path to our own inner selves. When the sacred predominates, the war horses are put out to grass. Plato regarded geometry and number as the ideal philosophical language, the art of the ever-true. He also recommended it as the clearest model by which to describe the metaphysical realm. What is sacred? It is that which brings us closer to understanding our true nature, who we are, where did we come from, where are we going, what's the point of existence. We are talking about the source of reality, called by any name you choose. We know that the statement all flesh is grass, Isaiah 46, is as much a scientific fact as a biblical truth. This means that all of our body is fueled by vegetation. Flowers are quite evidently vastly important members of the fully functioning whole we call nature or life. However, we have to be careful not to limit them to their obvious material or mechanical function of being the fertility mechanism of the vegetal world. Flower can be seen as a teacher of symmetry and geometry, the eternal verities, as Plato called them. However, the word teacher needs to be qualified as being reminded, rather than learning for the first time. This is more in line with the conclusions of the traditional wisdom of mankind. Plato talked of anamnesis, which was a sort of deep memory. This was based on Socrates' proposal that we have drunk of the waters of forgetfulness when we come into our incarnate state at birth, whereas previously, as the souls, we had access to all knowledge. So, from birth onwards, we relearn and are reminded of our intrinsic inner knowledge. Socrates taught his pupils by asking questions to draw out this knowledge. Educe, meaning to lead out, being the root of the word education. Other traditions use similar terms which have similar associations with remembering. To remember literally means to put the members back into their natural wholeness. It is in this sense that flowers can be treated as sources of remembering, a way of recalling our own wholeness and that of the natural world, as well as learning about our inner power of recognition and consciousness. All members or the animal kingdom, including humans, are normally aware of the flowering domain of the plant kingdom. Flower requires space to exist. This space may be even as large as miles when it comes to pollen on the wind. It requires time to fulfill its life cycle and produce the wherewithal to further the species. It requires number as a method of differentiation and balance, from its cells to its leaves and its petals, as well as for nourishment. The flower also requires form in which to cohere, to be recognizable, and to fulfill its necessary biological functions, and therefore become substantial. Each flower, once it is in material existence, exhibits its actuality and reflects its reality or the archetypal pattern by which it is recognized. Each of these conditions of existence is codependent on being within the field of consciousness with us as observers. Consequently, what is evident in the geometry of the face of a flower can recall in us the geometry that underlies all existence. This again is a reminder of how Plato's character Timaeus begins his explanation of the nature of the made universe. It is fabricated, he says, of sameness, otherness, and being or essence. Such is true of all principles or laws of nature. They are the same in principle, but expressed differently in each instance. There is another factor that needs to be acknowledged. Each flower is in process at all times. This means that it usually spirals into being, maintains a full-faced aspect for a time, then proceeds to withdraw life from this form as it contracts and often spirals back down into the soil. So, strictly speaking, the flat face of a flower offers to us a two-dimensional object of contemplation. What we find when investigating the geometry of the life cycle of a flower is that it describes or creates a flow from a point seed to flower bud, and then through a spherical unfolding. The field of action that the flower's movement takes up is largely spherical, yet petals perform a winding up to a winding down in each flower to complete its life's movement. We have already said that a flower has a face. This face is usually turned towards the light, particularly the sun, but in some cases the flower faces downward like the snowdrop, or fuchsia, or pulsatilla, no doubt protecting its delicate interior. Flowers that raise their faces towards the light are those that communicate most directly with us. Also, the fragrances are most easily experienced when the flower faces upward. This enables us to recognize the symmetry, patterns, and coloring of the petals, and their intrinsic geometrical proportions. As the ancient Japanese maxim goes, civilization was born when the first person offered a loved one the first flower. The lifespan of the flowering plant follows a rhythm from season to season until it is reborn, usually about a year later. Although there are many variations, flowers can continue to bloom through a summer, even a whole year in certain climes. This means that the time factor is critical in making any study. What becomes apparent to even the most elementary study is that a plant embodies and responds to rhythms. The most evident of these is the diurnal cycle of 24 hours. It is important to remember that this is a cosmic rhythm and function which affects all things on Earth. This once again confirms that organisms pulsate rhythmically. Life is rhythmic. Our heartbeat most emphatically confirms this. The turning of the Earth every 24 hours affects all living things on its surface. This is signaled by the arrival of light at dawn, or even before dawn, and the setting down of light at dusk. Many flowering plants are solar following, as well as solar opening. The light from the sky, direct sunlight or other, is the prime stimulant for a plant to flower and grow. Physically, light is the ultimate nourisher and timekeeper. Flowers express a plethora of beautiful symmetries ranging from the twofold to the manifold. The most predominant symmetry, particularly in wildflowers, is fivefold. It is intrinsic to this pentagonal symmetry that the golden proportion is present. Fruit blossoms are most often fivefold, a symmetry that is powerfully visible when we cut an apple across its meridian, passing through the 5 enclosures for the pips or seeds. Whatever else we might conclude about symmetry, it is valuable to acknowledge Plato's first principle of the triad of sameness, otherness, and being. In terms of flowers, this means that no 2 petals, let alone leaves, are ever exactly the same in a single bloom, yet they are usually clearly identifiable as an oak, ash, or willow. In short, all scrutiny of the natural world will entail sameness and otherness. These 2 qualities will always seem antagonistic or contrary, and therefore will never be resolved until our acknowledgement of being is recognized. Being reminds us of the extraordinary balance of nature and balance of the universe itself. Through cognizing being, we learn to see sameness and otherness simultaneously. In short, we can experience a host of tulips, though common experience reveals that each will be slightly different. Each is unique, yet unquestionably a tulip. Paradox alone can achieve unity. The difference between the geometry of flowers and the flowers of geometry is the same as the difference between the absolute or archetypal and the actual or apparent. When we take a single image of a flower, we know it will exhibit clear specific characteristics of its family and species, yet will also inevitably carry the imperfections or eccentricities of its individuality. Thank you for watching.